And welcome back to the Krug Show. Larry Krueger with you with Kyle Posey from Ninersnation as we talk a little 49er football as we've done in this spot the last few weeks. Kyle, good to see you, man. How are you?
Man, another week, 49ers land, and they always give us something to talk about. I'm doing well, man. Can't complain. Business is nice. How's life?
Things are good. Things are good. Yeah, busy day today. Doing a lot of stuff. We talked a little Giants baseball, a little Warrior basketball earlier today, and let's get right into it because my good friend, there's a lot of talk about Deebo Samuel, and we're going to get into it. And you never know what to believe and what's true and what's not true. Now, I don't know everybody in the media, but one guy I do know who I do believe in his reporting skills because I know he's a scout and he doesn't just throw a bunch of crap against the wall and hope, 5% of it sticks is my good friend Tony Pauline. Tony is reporting today that the Niners have offered Deebo $19 million APY. So I tend to believe that. There was a report this morning that Deebo may want to play closer to home. Home being South Carolina. So would that be Carolina Panthers? Would that be the Tennessee Titans? I'm not really exactly sure. But what do you make of the Deebo talk so far? Where are you at with Deebo as far as this story? Do you think he wants out? I'll give you my 2 cents in a minute, but give me your perspective first.
Well, let's start with Tony Pauline because I've been following him for a few years now. And just as you said, he's generally spot on. And I feel like in a lot of these instances, when you don't know about a person or a person who's putting out these news, it's easy to take their what they're saying as with a grain of salt. So I just want to let people know that Tony Pauline is pretty spot on just because he's not a national reporter or viewed as a national reporter. The information he puts out is generally right. So with that said, I agree. I think he's right. And I think the real takeaway here is knowing that what he said, 19 a year, that doesn't mean the 49ers started there. I would go as far to say as they probably started even lower, which is why, there's this Deebo's been up in arms over the situation over the past couple of weeks. So I imagine, he wants to be paid more. He wants to be compensated a lot more. I think all of these things are true. I feel like with the situation that we're talking about, it doesn't have to be, hey, it's about this, it's about this, it's about this. It's probably a lot of everything, and that's why we're here. So there's so much going on. There's so much to debunk in this Deebo situation. I think there's a good chance that he wants to be traded because of the money. I think that, we haven't even talked about the potential of, California taxes, how much he's going to lose as opposed to playing elsewhere. So, we can take this conversation in a billion different ways. But, just based on how he's been acting on social media the last couple of days, when he's going out of his way to say, hey, this isn't true, and eventually deleting it, aka his agent is in his ear. Let's take it there. How much of this is Deebo being new to a situation, Deebo not knowing how business works, Deebo, people are paying him as immature, which I don't think is fair, but where do you stand on that?
Well, yeah, first of all, he called himself a wide back. So the idea that he didn't like his usage, I think, is all related to the money that's being offered to him. I think if I'm Deebo, I think he said, you know what? They said, we want to use you as a running back. He said, you know what? I want to win. Whatever you think is going to win. They said, we think we're going to win best with handing you the rock. He said, you know what? I'm a team guy. So I think he was fine with that. But I think he assumed that the 49ers would take care of him at the end of the year. And to me, the fact when they started utilizing him as a running back, I think that they should have had an internal conversation about, guys, this is a receiver that we're using as a running back. He's only going to be happy if we use him as a running back if we pay him as a receiver. You guys know that, right? And so now here we are, and I think Parag is really good at what he does, and he gets players at a lesser amount than some teams pay because he's a grinding negotiator. So I think what's happening here is that the 49ers are now looking at this player, knowing they use him as a running back and not wanting to pay him, commensurate with where the wide receiver market has gone, courtesy of Trent Baalke giving Christian Kirk so much money, and that the big dollars being thrown to wide receivers. We're seeing $70 million in excess of $70 million guaranteed. And I think the 49er guarantee, Kyle, is probably a whole lot south of $70 million. And so now I think he's got his agent and family members and friends and people that love him saying, hey, man, they're in his ear saying they're not using you the right way. So is he opposed to the way he's used, or is he opposed to the offer that he's getting after the way he was used? I kind of think it's more the latter.
Yeah, so what we've heard just from Schefter, just from Rap Sheet, just from the national media as of late is, Deebo doesn't want to be a running back. And part of that is probably because they're offering him low guarantees. And if he's going to be a running back, if he's going to have that much, tread over the next 4 years, why wouldn't you want a lot of guarantees up front, knowing that there's a high potential? He does have an injury history, and everybody's aware of that. If he's going to have the ball, as much as a normal running back would, the probability of him being hurt, just goes up. So if I'm Deebo, I want as many guarantees as I can get, especially up front. And I don't think that's the 49ers way. I don't think they're going to be willing to give him that guarantee, at least right away. So that's probably a big reason why both sides are far apart. And as you mentioned, that guarantee with AJ Brown, with DK Metcalf, probably closer to 50, closer to 55, where Deebo's probably looking at something closer to 45, 50. So it's far apart, and what's going to change? Like, who's going to budge first is a real question.
Well, and the other question is he going to be happy being his skill set is a dual skill set. He's a running back and he's a wide receiver. Yes, he was a wide receiver first, but he's both. And if you really want to maximize his skill set, which is the job of every offensive coordinator, you're going to use him as a running back. So is he okay being used as a running back for a different team besides the 49ers? I mean, it's like, if you want to be traded, you don't like the way you're utilized. So are you saying that you're only willing to be traded to a team that will utilize you as a wide receiver? Because aren't these teams, if I'm a team that's going to trade what the 49ers supposedly want, and we'll get into that, supposedly the Niners want a king's ransom, I would too. But if you're going to pay that king's ransom in draft picks or players for Deebo Samuel, you want to be able to use him where he's best. And he's best as a half receiver, half running back. He had 12 drops, but he's a unique talent with the ball in his hands. We all know that. You could argue I think he's in some ways a better running back than he is a receiver. So is he not happy with the way he was utilized, or is he not happy with the guaranteed money being offered? I guess that would be the question I would have. Is he okay being utilized as a running back if the money is better? Or is it really, does he really want to leave the 49ers, or does he just want more money? All these, I get the feeling that on both sides, these are all negotiating tactics. I don't get the feeling that we're really getting how the Niners actually feel, or how Deebo actually feels about them. We're hearing kind of the rumblings from a negotiation where the details we're not privy to.
Yeah, it sounds like both sides can meet in the middle pretty easily here. And that's why the only tricky part is if there is a hard deadline, if they do feel like, you know what, we're not going to be able to reach a long-term extension with Deebo. And if they feel like they're only going to have him under contract for another year and he threatens to hold out instead of being franchised, that's when you think about moving him with a draft coming a week from now. But just as you said, I think it's more about, well, first of all, in my opinion, he was one of the best running backs in the NFL last year. And I know he doesn't have a high volume of carries, but there aren't players who you can turn around, hand the ball to, and know that he can turn that into explosive carry. He did that game after game after game. He bailed the 49ers out a lot. And I feel like a lot of that's being ignored when we talk about Deebo Samuel. Everybody knows, how special of a season he was, but he was essentially their offense. They ran through Deebo, whether it's handing the ball off to him, whether it's just throwing a simple slant, giving him a screen, and him taking that to the house. So he has every right to be wanted to pay for the season that he just had. But the 49ers are thinking of longevity. The 49ers are thinking of, will he be able to give us that in 2022, 2023, 2024, and not just a couple games here and there? Because when you pay a guy top 3 money, you're expecting him to be there every game. And history would suggest Deebo's not going to be there every game. So again, I get it from both sides, and that's what makes the situation so tough. I don't think that there's a right answer here.
It's one of those days you're glad you're doing a podcast and not John Lynch, right? Because John Lynch has got to do this in real time with the bullets flying and the fans and the owner and the locker room and all these things that are factors in this situation. All right, let's talk about Lynch's options here. What do you see the options being? Do you dictate to Parag, your capologist, who negotiates these deals that you're going to make an exception and pay this player more and try to keep him on the roster? Are you going to put it in Prague's hands and say, you know what? Prague says he can get him for X. We're going to try to, that's the route we're going to go. And if we upset the player, we upset the player. It sounds like, Kyle, they're asking for a king's ransom in return. Does that mean they want all four of the Jets' top four picks they have four in the top 38? Do they want all four of those picks? Is there any chance they could get all four of those picks? And if they could, is that preferred, or would you rather have Deebo? There's a lot of questions here. Which one do you want to tackle? I mean, it's to me, this we could talk about this and only this for an hour.
Right. So what about Trey Lance? You just invested in Trey Lance.
How does he feel?
So how do you feel about building your offense around Trey Lance? Are you going to be, is there going to be a better version in 2022 when you put out an offense that doesn't involve Deebo Samuel? That's unlikely, right? Like a rookie, even with those high draft picks, you're probably not going to get the same type of production that you got from Deebo Samuel. You're probably not going to get the same type of production from Deebo Samuel in 2021, but you know the type of player you're putting out there. There's no guessing games. Everybody talks about how the draft is a crapshoot. We're talking about a receiver, 21, 22 years old, who's never had any NFL experience. Yes, it's a Kyle Shanahan offense, but again, we're talking about a player who had multiple games over 150 yards when he wasn't even barely doing actual receiver things. He was just running slants and screens and just over routes over the middle. So I don't envision them sitting down, having these discussions and coming out away thinking that they're better without Deebo, which is why it would make the most sense. And tying it back into Trey Lance, I have a rookie quarterback on a rookie contract for the next few seasons. Take advantage of that and extend Deebo now. So it's just about that final number. As you said, Deebo wants $25 million. They probably were nowhere near $25 million. As I said, 16, 19, wherever that is. Come to 24, give him money up front, because that's probably what he wants. Again, he wants that. He wants to know that he's going to be taken care of. So I think it's going to come down to that. How much are they willing to give Deebo up front, and how much are they willing to make it seem like, dress up the contract like he is the highest paid wide receiver? Do you think there's a chance that we see him get moved? Do you think that eventually we get there, maybe a week from now, they decide, hey, we need those draft picks. We're going to continue to, build on a strength, whether that's defense? Because I think an interesting angle is, let's say they do move Deebo, and now they have those Jets picks, and maybe it's 10, 35, maybe it's 35, 38, and 69, building on strength, building on your defense. And, your offense is built around Kyle Shanahan, who knows how to get wide receivers open. Again, that's a whole other angle, but I think it's a plausible one too.
Well, it's really interesting too. It's like, what if you could get, let's just say the Jets said they wouldn't give the fourth pick. They're going to keep 4. But let's say you could get 10 in those 2 seconds. Well, I mean, think about what you could potentially do with those picks. I mean, at 10, you might be able to get Garrett Wilson, the Buckeyes receiver.
I think you get whichever receiver you want to at 10.
Yeah, I'm not a Drake London fan. I guess that's my big problem. I don't like Drake London that much. I know he's big. He's a former basketball player. I don't see the quickness. I don't see the burst. And I don't see the separation when I watch the film that makes me think that he can separate against NFL corners. So I'd be really bummed out if they dumped Deebo and replaced him with Drake London. But if you could get Garrett Wilson, I think Wilson's got more. He's got home run ability. And then let's just say you took those 3 picks and said, we are going to take these 3 picks. And with these 3 picks, our only goal is to replace Deebo. And so we're going to go Garrett Wilson in round 1. We're going to come back in round 2, and we're going to get a running back. We're going to get Kenneth Walker the third out of Michigan State. And then we're going to take a flyer on Christian Watson, because we don't think right now he's ready, but in a year we think he might be the best receiver in this class. So now I'm getting Christian Watson, Garrett Wilson, and Kenneth Walker the third for Deebo Samuel. Am I better off? Man, I don't know. I might be better off. I mean, as opposed to paying maybe $70 million guaranteed to a receiver that you still want to use as a running back, and you're still going to be subjected to those hits, and who has had a bunch of soft tissue injuries. I mean, what's the likelihood that Deebo suffers another injury over the next year or so? Probably pretty high.
Yeah,
where if you went and got those 3 players, You've diversified your offensive attack. You've added depth to your football team, and you may be, you're going to be a different team, but you're still going to be an explosive team. And if you wanted to take out one of those offensive players and some, add in a corner or edge rusher or whatever whatever position you wanted to supplement, if you just thought one receiver, one running back, but you could replace Deebo as a runner and as a receiver and have a third pick. Man, I'd be very tempted to do that. And I think that if I was sitting there arguing in a room full of people, even though Deebo's the name brand and the safer route because you know what you're getting as opposed to draft picks, I could make a very compelling argument that the better thing to do for the 49ers long term is to take those picks and to go in a different direction and not give all that money to Deebo. And that's the way I look at it. I don't look at it as, but if they can only get one pick, I want Deebo. But if they can get a package of 3 picks in the first 2 rounds, I'm not as tied to Deebo as the fans are because I see the downside of all those hammies, quads, all the things that have ailed him going back to South Carolina.
I was going to say, so he's missed 11 games in 3 seasons, but going back to South Carolina, he's had an injury that's, caused him to miss games in 5 of the last 7 seasons. So history is essentially suggesting he's going to get hurt at some point, if not in each of the next few seasons, when you extend him. That is a terrifying thing to think about when you're giving a person $50 million guaranteed. And not just that, he's your offense. Like, that's who you're building your offense around. So if he's out for a game or two, that could be the difference in home field advantage or not in the playoffs, or you making the playoffs. So again, like, the business side of things of this is terrifying, and you have to mention the financial. So you have one player who's tied up a lot of this money, or rookies over the next 4 or 5 years who you have control, financial flexibility, and you're paying essentially pennies to, and they're going to be a focal point of your offense as you continue to build with Trey Lance. So now come free agency, now that you have all this cap space, you can bring in more veterans, more proven commodities. And even if you want to get aggressive, you have these trade picks, these picks to trade, you can, go the Rams route and maybe trade one of your future picks because you have so many rookies on these, rookie contracts. So it's fascinating to think about. When you mention some of those players, like Drake London, for example, when you watch him, the last thing you think of is him fitting in a Kyle Shanahan offense. So that would be something that you do worry about as well, is them bringing in a player who, might be productive in another offense, but he's not a fit for Kyle Shanahan's offense. I do think it's interesting when you say running back, because now with Deebo gone, who's going to be the running back? Yeah, it's Elijah Mitchell, but he already missed 5 games in 1 season, man. That's not a good start. Like, that's not a good first impression. And yes, he's productive, but I think that they can get better production out of the running back position. People would be up in arms if they took a running back with one of the picks that they traded Deebo for. That would be funny to watch play out. But a guy like Walker, man, who's going to be a better fit in Kyle Shanahan's offense than him? He's a home run back, and he's sturdy too. Like, he's going to be able to hold up. So, man, that's interesting that you spin it. So I brought up, using those picks on defense, and you bring up, Deebo, just replacing him with 3 essential players, which you would imagine Kyle Shanahan would be able to maximize that. So there's so many ways that you can go with this. And I don't think that there's a wrong answer, but it just comes down to, what you feel like is the best. Am I going to be better with Deebo at that number, which is what we have to talk about because it's it's a business, or 3 rookies and essentially continue to develop them, and I'm still able to bring in some veterans? So, man, do you think he's on the roster? Do you think he's on the roster a week from now after the draft?
I don't.
You think their minds already made up?
I just think that you need 2 to tango, right?
Yep.
They want a blockbuster, but the Jets are sitting there able to offer a blockbuster. So they're, it really depends on, and I think Joe Douglas is on the hot seat. So I think he needs a difference maker, and a rookie receiver added to a second-year quarterback is more question marks. You added Deebo Samuel, and now you're adding one of the best players in the NFL. And that's going to sell tickets in New York, and that's going to get attention, and that's going to put you on the back page of the tabloids, and you're going to steal headlines away from the G-men. And, I think all those things play a role in this as well. And then Saleh gets a player that he's comfortable with, so your head coach is signing on. I just wonder what they really could get. I mean, if they could get a bounty of picks, I mean, that would be very, very intriguing. Here's the other question I think has to be asked. I think Deebo Samuel, Kyle, has been almost a perfect fit for Jimmy Garoppolo. Why? Because Jimmy can't throw it deep.
Right.
He's got to throw it short and have the run after the catch guy. But Trey's got the ability to throw the ball down the field, but he throws a very high speed wobble throw, a ton of velocity on his throw. He drives the ball with incredible strength. And I think it's safe to say it's a more difficult ball to catch. Deebo had 12 drops last year. His game is not his hands. His game is his legs and his run after the catch ability. So I'm kind of wondering, I know Deebo was the perfect receiver for Jimmy, but maybe some of these other receivers, the Jahan Dotson from Penn State, some of these guys that truly run better routes, refined route runners with great hands, maybe there's a different type of receiver that would succeed with Trey because you got to be able to pluck it with your hands. You got to be able to catch the fastball. And maybe there's going to be more deep patterns in this offense with Trey than Jimmy, where he could hand it off or dump it off to Deebo underneath, and Deebo could run after the catch. Do you see the change in quarterback changing the need at receiver at all?
So I think the offense is going to be a lot different under Trey Lance, and for the better. You mentioned being able to throw the ball down the field. I think it's more than that. I think it's being able to throw the ball outside of the numbers. So now you're not focused on throwing between the hashes where the field's so condensed, and that's why Deebo had those drops. People always talk about drops. So if you look at the top 10 players in drops last year, we're talking about Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, Cooper Kupp. There are a lot of high-level wide receivers. So it's essentially a volume stat. And when you're going over the middle in those congested areas like Deebo was, there's bodies all around you. So it's going to be more difficult to catch the ball. I feel like a lot of his drops were focus drops where he's just running before he's catching the ball. So I'm not too worried about that, especially knowing, the next couple of plays, he'll probably turn into explosive play or even a touchdown. But as far as receivers go, I think you will be able to get, they will be fine if they trade Deebo and have another wide receiver because, as I mentioned, the offense is going to be different. They're going to need a guy who can catch the ball outside the numbers. They're going to be a guy who can win one-on-one. So a guy like Dotson is incredible. Like, he would be a perfect fit for them. But it seems like Kyle Shanahan just likes a guy like Garrett Wilson. Like, he seems like the type of player who Shanahan would fall in love with because he's a monster after the catch. In Shanahan's offense, he will get you the ball or he will get you open from 20 yards and under. You just have to do the work after the fact. And Garrett Wilson is that guy to do that afterwards. So that is more of a player who I would think they would gravitate toward. But again, like you mentioned, Christian Watson, a deep guy, a post guy, a shot play receiver like that. They don't really have that on the roster. Could Brandon Ayuk be that guy? I mean, he was in a little bit in college, but we haven't really seen it consistently at the NFL level. But is it fair to judge Brandon Ayuk because of his quarterback? Because remember, like, how many times do you remember Jimmy throwing the ball outside the numbers and down the field on these isolation routes? And you can probably count them on two hands.
Yeah,
so
I was going to say, not often.
Yeah, it's tough to judge those guys like that.
James Foster makes a donation here. He says Deebo's weakness is drops and fumbles and injuries. What's Ayuk's weakness? Jimmy G. I like that. James doing material. It is interesting as far as, maybe that was the issue with Ayuk is his chemistry or lack thereof with Jimmy G. And it'll be interesting to see with Trey as they're working out together if we see a huge jump in Brandon Ayuk. Here's one other name to throw into the mix or two names I want to get your thoughts on. One, there's an awful lot of conjecture about Julio Jones. And what if you made this trade on draft day, Kyle? And yes, you're making John Lynch is very aware. He knows how popular Deebo is. And he knows even if he gets a haul of picks, he's probably going to get ripped if he trades Deebo. But if he trades Deebo, gets a haul of picks, and signs Julio Jones on draft day, I think a lot of that negative discussion is offset by the big name branding of Julio Jones, despite the fact that you and I know he couldn't get on the field for Tennessee this year because of his own hamstring issues. And then the other name I want your thoughts on, there's an awful lot of talk today that maybe Deebo just wants to play closer to home, and that's why he really wants out. I think that's false. But closer to home could mean, you got an unhappy receiver with A.J. Brown with the Titans. What would you do? A Deebo, A.J. Brown straight up flip, trade if Tennessee called you?
So
Is that a
let's
fair
start.
deal?
Let's start with Julio because
Yeah.
he just turned 33 in February, and he's played 19 games in 2 years. Last season, he had one 100-yard game. Outside of that, he only had 2 games over 50 yards. The Julio that everybody remembers is not the Julio who's going to be for the 49ers in 2022. Like, you would cross your fingers to get 10 games out of him. So that's just a lot of hope in regards to that. And I mean, A.J. Brown's been dinged up himself. He missed
Right.
time last year. So there's it seems like all of these players that we're mentioning, no matter what, like they are going to be banged up. So Brown was on the field for 13 games. He is a different level player, though. I could not imagine Brown being any worse than Deebo. Obviously, different skill sets. 24 years old, so he's still a baby. He's great size, speed, can catch the ball. We talk about making contested catches or making those difficult catches. That's AJ Brown. He makes catches with guys draped all over him
Down the field.
Yeah, I was going to say, we're talking about shot play receivers getting one-on-one. AJ Brown would really just imagine. Remember the preseason touchdown that Trey Lance had down the field?
Yeah.
That would be to AJ Brown, and that would be money more often than not. So if they were able to come away with AJ Brown after, in the midst of a Deebo, fiasco, whatever you want to call it, the 49ers win that trade. So as a rookie, AJ Brown went over 1,000 yards. The next season went over 1,000 yards. This past season, he missed a few games. I think he missed a month, and he still had 869 yards with Ryan Tannehill as his quarterback. And on top of that, with everybody in the stadium knowing he's going to get the ball, everybody in the stadium knowing that, the defense is heading towards AJ Brown. So I think very highly of AJ Brown, and I couldn't imagine a better fit for an established player. So you don't have to part ways, and have trade one picks or whatever. So AJ Brown would be great.
I think I can make a very compelling argument that A.J. Brown might be a better fit with Trey Lance than Deebo Samuel. Kalba Kamiga just making a donation. He says, Deebo and Jimmy for Darnold and 6. Getting rid of Darnold's $19 million contract by itself is worth a second rounder. Carolina can redo Jimmy's contract after the deal. Niners then trade back from 6 and collect more picks. What do you think of the idea of pairing Jimmy and Deebo together in a deal? If Deebo really wants to go back to South Carolina, the Panthers are actually the closest NFL team to that destination. What do you think of that move?
Honestly, that's the most plausible one of all, where you want to move Jimmy, you might have to move Deebo, and teams like, for example, the Panthers. And there's other sneaky teams that we're not talking about, like the Texans would be a great example. So they have the picks, they have the cap space to pay both players. It's not, close like Deebo said, but, you're getting what you want in return. But I think taking on Darnold's contract is a very realistic probability, just because they want to move him. You would be able to, you have the cap space by moving Jimmy. So that opens up $25 million. So you have to take on $19 million. I would push back. I would counter that. Hey, we'll take half. We'll take 10, 8, 9, whatever it may be. Right. And then still you can restructure Darnold. But the big thing is getting that Panthers pick. So if you get 6 and you trade back, somebody's going to want to come up there and say, let's say the Saints, for example, they are rumored to be in love with a tackle. You get a tackle run. Charles Cross is there. The Saints want him. Now you go back from 6 to 18. You get a future first. You get 18. You get a second round, third round in this draft. And now you're really cooking. Now you have plenty of money to work with. You can get whoever receiver probably you wanted that you would have wanted at 6 or at 10, a few picks back. That would be the best case scenario for the 49ers, is to get that early first, trade back. Now you get future draft capital. You open up cap space. And, I mean, you can still build your roster. You also get another guy for Trey Lance. So that would be the best case scenario for sure.
Larry Krueger, Kyle Posey talking Niner football, chopping it up a little bit here. Man, this is why I love doing this segment with you, man, because it's like, one, it's great energy. You know your stuff. And there's just so many like little tentacles to this story and the Niner stories that we could do these things for hours. And there's tons of people in the room. Everybody's fired up. AJ's got this one for us. He says, great show, gents. In my humble opinion, AJ, who are we kidding? We all know you're not humble. 49ers need to be decisive and not let this thing linger, and definitely not pass the draft.
Right.
We need to try to recoup something back. I could not agree with AJ more. I think this offseason has been underwhelming, and I think the 49ers need a significant performance on draft day from their front office, and they need to reach closure with Jimmy, closure on this Samuel talk, and start adding pieces of significance, not special teamers, not role players, not backups. Add some starter potential to this roster in this offseason. That's what this offseason has been a little bit devoid of, to be honest, for my liking. I wanted to see more starters or potential starters added, and they're acting like they've got the starters all locked up and they just need a little tinkering here or there. I'd like to see them emerge from this draft with closure and at least 3 or 4 potential starters. Give me your thought on that.
Yeah, the worst case, if trading up with the Panthers is the best case scenario, the worst case is thinking you have your pulse on the Deebo situation. You mismanage it. He holds out. He says, I'm not playing with you guys ever again. Now you get past the draft. Now you don't have Deebo on your roster. Now you can't upgrade. You spent your draft picks thinking that Deebo's going to be on the roster. So you waited until day 3 to draft a wide receiver. Now what are you going to do? So yeah, that I would want closure for sure. Not just a week from now. I probably want it by Monday. That way I have a couple of days to work out some trades to move up in the draft, or to work with teams to say, hey, he doesn't want to be here. Here's what we have. Here's our offer. So yeah, it would be terrifying going into Thursday when the first round of the draft starts, not knowing what I'm going to get from Deebo Samuel.
Yeah, no, you got. We need answers. We need answers. It's been a lot of conjecture. A lot of time has passed. Now we need to see some actual pieces of the puzzle added to the mix. This is always a tough one because, I'm not this kind of guy that every situation doesn't have to have blame. But let me throw this out because a lot of people are saying that there is an awful lot of blame to go around here. Do you blame? Is there anybody to blame in this Deebo situation? Or Kyle, is it simply put, it's situational, and this just kind of all came about because they needed a runner. They used him as a runner. Balky gave the receiver way too much money. Christian Kirk, that exploded the wide receiver market. It's now gone beyond what they had budgeted for, and it's not really Parag's fault or Kyle's fault or Lynch's fault as much as it is just situational, reacting to the salaries around the league. Is there blame in this situation, or is this a blameless situation?
Well, when in doubt, I feel like we can always blame Trent Baalke because,
yeah,
I mean, giving Christian Kirk that money is probably why a lot of these receivers moved, because their agents like, if he's getting that, my guy's 10 times better. And if you're Deebo, think about this, and he's being offered $19 million, and Christian Kirk got 17.5. What are we doing here? Like, if you were to ask anybody in the world who's better, who's more valuable, who's worth what, there's no way that you're going to get an answer that somebody says they're within $1.5 million. So, but as far as Deebo and the 49ers go, how could you blame Deebo coming off a career year, a 26-year-old, where he just had over 1,700 yards from scrimmage, wanting to be compensated like a player who just had an all everything year? So no, I don't blame him for that. If he does really want to go back home and play near his family, no, of course not. You can't blame somebody for that. That's just human. That's, him having human emotions. There's nothing wrong with that. If you're the 49ers and you do business this way, or naturally you're going to lowball somebody, eventually you'll get to that number, but Deebo doesn't know that. This is his first time in negotiations. So I don't blame them for doing business the way that they always do either. And if they end up trading Deebo, knowing that they probably had an answer from Deebo, and there's no way in hell they're going to wait till after the draft to replace him, you have to do what you have to do. You have to do what's best for your team. You have to build around that team, build around that player that you've invested in, Trey Lance. So no, I don't think anybody outside of Baalke is the person to blame.
Uncle Salty agrees with you, Kyle. He says, I like that. When in doubt, blame Trent Baalke. I like my linebackers. I remember I interviewed him in camp one year, and they had, I think Gerald Hodges might have been their best backer. And I'm like, Trent, you obviously are pretty thin at linebacker. He's like, we like our linebackers. By the end, by the end of the year, I was like, oh my goodness, really? That was the year remember that year where they just could not stop the run and they were getting absolutely drubbed. Everybody, Belial Powell was
Oh,
eating their
baby.
lunch, and Jaquez Rogers was rumbling through their defense. And it was all because they had no linebackers, courtesy of Trent Baalke. Let's talk a little bit about the draft. Draft coming up on Thursday. So much of the emphasis is funny. It's on the first round. Niners right now don't have a first round pick, but as we all know, that could change and looks like it may change. Needless to say, it's going to be a weekend. If you're a Niner fan, you're going to want to be glued to the TV because deals could happen at any moment with teams on the clock, guys coming off the board. But there's been a lot of time in the last few weeks for us to kind of crunch some of these players a little bit. I know you've been doing the same thing I've been doing. So give me somebody that you're kind of liking going into the draft, or you're liking more now that you're looking at them. Is there as I get closer to the draft, I always start to kind of hone in on the positions of need and who all those candidates are and what those options look like. Is there a player or two, Kyle, that you've looked at and said, you know what, I like the skill set and I could see them coming to the 49ers? Or give me just some guys you like coming into this thing.
I think the easy one is Cam Jurgens, Nebraska center.
Nebraska
just
center.
Because Alex Mack, we're talking about him retiring, the potential of him retiring. But I want to be clear when I say Cam Jurgens would be a good fit for the 49ers, but I don't think they're going to draft a guy on day 2 or after who's going to be able to come in and beat out Daniel Brunskill. And when I say that, it comes off as a hot take because people think Daniel Brunskill, he got bowled over by this person. Oh, he got bowled over by this person.
Right.
But over the course of 60 snaps, over the course of a full season, he's actually pretty competent and he's been reliable. He's been available. He also has starter experience at center. He's played over 500 snaps, which is essentially the equivalent of 9 starting games in the NFL at center. So he's going to be more experienced in whoever you draft. I don't know that they're going to be able to get a guy, who's going to be better year 1 than Brunskill. But with that said, I think Jurgens is a guy who's athletic. He has power. He's going to take a little refining, but that's what you pay your offensive line coaches for, right? That's why they make the big bucks. So he's one. Let's go to the defensive side. I mean, we've talked about Lewis Cine. I love him. I mean, if they do get one of those mid-round picks, he needs to be circled. Like, he needs to be one of the picks, no doubt. They need a safety. We know that. So Jalen Petrie, Jaquan Brisker. Kirby Joseph is another name. That's interesting if they do wait until the 3rd round to draft a safety. So he's more of a free safety center field type. He doesn't really like to mix it up. That's not really his game. But I think he's versatile enough, and he has, like, the ball skills. They need a guy. They need a playmaker on the back end. So when I'm naming these guys, all of these guys can take the ball away. And that is a safety they need to come away with in this draft. Somebody who can catch, who can make tackles, who can hit, but is just a playmaker who has a nose for the ball, has a knack for being around the ball. And I think Kirby Joseph can be that guy. He was just getting better and better. I mean, he played 1 year at Illinois, essentially, when he's not playing a cover 2 Lovie Smith defense. So we really didn't get to see what he's capable of other than this past year.
It's an interesting draft on a lot of fronts. I just saw a thing from Greg Cosell today where he was kind of being very critical of the huge defensive lineman from Georgia, whose name always escapes me. I'm the monster defensive tackle, not Devontae Wyatt, but
Jordan Davis,
big Jordan Davis. And Cosell was being critical, just saying, he doesn't really move anybody off the line of scrimmage. And he's the biggest athlete we've seen at that spot. He's just a monster. He makes Javon Kinlaw look like a small player. I mean, that's how big this guy is.
It's saying something.
Yeah. I love the Georgia kids. I love Cine, the safety. Love Nakobe Dean, and the guy that I really am hoping falls for the 49ers, or if they get a couple high 2s in a trade for the Jets. I love Devontae Wyatt. I think Wyatt could fall. 315 pounds, great motor, scheme versatile, inside, outside. The way they love to play games up front with their linemen. This is a guy who's athletic enough to line up at end, and he's strong enough to line up at tackle, and you can play games for days with him. And he's a very refined player, and he's got a great motor. To me, those 3 guys, Dean and Cine and Wyatt, that Georgia defense was spectacular on all three levels, and I think those are difference making players. I think Cine is fast enough to play the free safety role, but I think he's tough enough. Heck, he could probably play him at weak side linebacker. He's such a thumper. And then Wyatt is an incredible talent with his quickness at that size. And then the Kobe Dean might be the best player in this draft that's going to be underdrafted. I mean, I know he's 5'11", Kyle, but this is a Pro Bowl linebacker if I've ever seen one. And a Pro Bowl linebacker has a lot of value, especially on game day when you're sitting there going, who's going to make a play in a key situation. They don't need that player necessarily, but those three Georgia players are guys that I just think are going to all be, they're going to be Pro Bowl kind of talents at the next level.
Do you remember K1 Short from the Panthers, D tackle?
Yes, Purdue, played at Purdue, big dancing bear from Chicago.
He has a lot of that's who kind of reminds me of Wyatt when I watch him. A guy who can win inside and outside, has some quickness, and he's just going to end up better in the NFL. You can just see it, that he's going to be a productive player for a long, long time. One of my friends said about Jordan Davis, he's Albert Haynesworth if he cared about football.
Albert Haynesworth, who once stomped on somebody's head in the pile. I remember that. The pride of Tennessee. It's an interesting draft on a lot of fronts because, like, if you said what's the biggest need for the 49ers, it's hard to say because they've covered themselves well in that, like, maybe it's the offensive line, but then, they almost won. They almost went to the Super Bowl last year. They had Tom Compton and Daniel Brunskill on the right side, and you still got Banks and Jalen Moore who are draft picks that have to be plugged in. You would think that those guys start. At least I would think they would start. So if they are going to start, do you need? Is that really the need? It's like we think it's the need because we don't know how they view Banks or Moore. But if they view Banks and Moore as guys who can start, then maybe the need is not really the offensive line, and maybe the need is more the secondary or their maybe a wide receiver with speed, or maybe a running back who can be the number one running back. I mean, they're picking, they may be able to find a real incredible talent at running back.
I think based on letting Laken Tomlinson walk and not reinvesting in the position essentially tells us how they feel about Banks and Jalen Moore and Daniel Brunskill, and they're confident in those three. Are we on the outside? Probably not, but we didn't see those three, or we didn't see Moore and we didn't see Banks in practice in training camp going against the 49ers defensive line every day. So they're probably a lot higher on them. And again, like, Banks is a second round pick. He has to play. So we got to find out if he's good. And there's only one way to do that, right? Essentially, practice can only get you so far. Put him out there, throw him in the trenches and see what he can do. I think it's safety, though, just because Jaquiski Tartt, I know everybody's going to remember the drop. Everybody's going to remember the games he missed. But when he played, and he did play a lot lately, when he played, he was the glue guy. When he played, they did not give up anything on the back end. They were so sound on defense. Their safeties moved in unison, and they were just really tough, man. Of course, you have the defensive line. You have all the great players, whether it's Nick Bosa, whether it's Fred Warner. But I think finding a safety who's not just competent, but a guy who just understands the game, who's not going to make those mental mistakes, and who's athletic enough to cover. Atalno Ufunga, as I've seen a lot of people high on him. When he was in the game last year, they gave up a lot of plays, and they gave up big plays, and he was a big reason why. So relying on him, sure, he can get better, but expecting him to just turn into a starter overnight after what he showed last year is just, a lot of hope. And that's not how you operate in the NFL. You need tangible results, and he didn't produce those as a rookie. So I think safety is one of their biggest needs. But I mean, I don't think running back's that far behind. And I know they just drafted 2 running backs, which is crazy to say. But if Deebo isn't an option, Deebo's not going to be a guy who you can turn around and hand the ball off to 20 times like you were able to at points last year. A running back might be a sneaky need as well.
Yeah. You can never have enough dynamic runners. Let's hit the board for a few, and then we'll say goodbye. Jaquan Brisker, Lee Ving. I like that. He says, Brisker looks great. Don't know if he makes it past 30 to 38 range. They, obviously they went to the Penn State Pro Day. Then they also hosted Brisker. He seems like a name that's been tied to them on a couple fronts. What do you think of Jaquan?
Yeah, he's great, man. I think when I'm talking about guys who understand what the other team is doing, what the offense wants to do, somebody who lives around the line of scrimmage, lives around the ball, I like him. I also like his attitude. So there was a couple plays where I saw where he would make a play and he's running to the quarterback, talking crap, trash talking in his face. Like, to me, that matters. Like, defense feeds off emotion and energy.
Yep, absolutely.
So getting a player like that who is a leader, who's communicating. You can see Brisker before the snap, directing traffic, telling players where to go, telling them what's about to come. So if they walk out of this draft with a player like Brisker, it would be tough for me to look down on them. So yeah, that would be great.
Couple last comments and then we'll call it a show. Slot corner, speed wide receiver, the new Deebo, running back depth. That's one of the things we're hearing. Where is slot corner in this mix of needs? I mean, and who do you think they're, because that, to me, isn't it funny how football evolves? Slot corner used to be like, nice little specialty. Now it's like your slot corner may be more important than your sixth or seventh defensive lineman or your third or fourth linebacker. I mean, you better have a good slot corner. That's a really tough spot to play. K1's given them some phenomenal play at that spot. Is there a slot corner you like in this draft? And where do you put slot corner in the lineage of Niner needs?
Yeah, I mean, think about it. Slot corner, you're guarding Cooper Kupp now. That's what your slot corner is asked to do. You're guarding Tyler Lockett. You're guarding, let's say DeAndre Hopkins moves into the slot, or Rondale Moore for the Cardinals now. So the 49ers need that. I don't know if that's already on the roster. Maybe it's Emmanuel Mosley. People probably don't know this, but in training camp, when K'Wan Williams with the second team, Emmanuel Mosley would actually work in the slot. So maybe they view Ambry Thomas on the outside. On the other side, you have Tre'Davious Ward, obviously, and then you kick Emmanuel Mosley in on passing downs. That can be an option because he does tackle. He's a willing tackler, and he has the movement skills to, cover receivers with a two-way go. So maybe it's Mosley. Maybe he's not on the roster. Maybe it's a guy like Marcus Jones, who they have hosted out of Houston, who has like all the ball skills in the world to create turnovers. He's a little undersized. He's 5'8". He's 180. Who knows how he's going to hold up, when he does have to tackle. But it's a mindset, really. And I think he has a mindset. And again, he's won so much at the college level that it's hard to imagine that'll just go away at the NFL level. So, Marcus Jones is also going to fall because of his size, I imagine, too, in the third round. So that would be a guy I would look for.
Jones's break on the ball is crazy. I mean, he's got a tremendous break on the ball. Here's an interesting one. We'll finish with this one. Uncle Salty says, should the punt god, Matt Ariza, be a consideration for the Niners? It's funny. I saw the interview, the draft featured. I really enjoy some of those that they do, but they interviewed this punter. I've never seen a more arrogant punter in my entire life. I mean, this guy just exudes confidence. I mean, he's historically good. And he knows it, you know what I mean? And it comes across like it's so bizarre to see it. Usually the specialists, the kickers, the punters, they're all kind of humble. Oh, shucks. This guy's like, yeah, man, I can boot it 84 yards in the air. But Ariza is he's like Ray Guy. What round would, if you're in John Lynch's war room, you're one of his lieutenants, he's going around the room pre-draft. He says, we want Ariza. What round do you think he goes in? And what round are you willing to commit our pick to? We want to pick him. Do we take him in the third, the fourth? Is that too early? Is he a day 3 guy? Is he a 5th round guy? Is he a late day 3? What's the highest pick you would invest in Ariza? Where do you think he'll ultimately go?
So you talk about just him being able to punt the ball 84 yards in the air. So he talks all that, but he can back it up. There's no doubt about it. Like he'll punt the ball and just start walking to the sideline knowing that nobody else is going to get it. Like he is that good. With that said, there's no way I'm investing in a valuable draft pick with a punter. They just took Mitch Wisnowski in the 4th round, and look at that return on the value.
Yeah, no.
It's not going to work out. Think about it. Think about who they've gotten in the 5th round. They have an all-pro tight end who's probably the best tight end in the world, who they drafted in the 5th round. The value of DJ Jones, who just walked out the door, like he's on the day 3. Elijah Mitchell, 6th rounder, who you might take a punter or kicker with. He's your starting running back. I'm not taking a punter. I'm not using a draft pick on a punter just because the odds that one of these other positions hit, if you put them in the right situation, we're talking about slot corners. You can probably grab and draft a slot corner on day 3 who will give you way more production than a punter. If you're relying on a punter to be successful, you need to rethink your offense. That's what I think.
Yeah.
So, I'm not investing in a punter. There's no way. Not in 2022. Not with the matchups and the speed that'll be available. No shot.
I'd have to say, I'd have to get all my real primary needs filled. there has to be nobody on the board with high end potential on either side of the ball that I really believe in. And it would have to be probably halfway through the 5th round. If I have a pick and it's after halfway through the 5th round, and those parameters are met, and there's nobody I'm really loving, I guess I would take a flyer on the 85-yard punter. But you know what? I'm with Kyle. I didn't like the 4th round pick for Wishnowsky. I didn't even think they picked the right guy. I would have taken the guy from Stanford who New England took, and he's been better. But I'm not for the kicker high, the punter high. I remember when the Raiders went Janikowski and the Niners went with Julian Peterson in the next pick. Now, you could argue when you look at the length of the career that Janikowski had, that maybe the Raiders made the better pick. But no, I cannot go kicker or punter, on day 1 or day 2 of the draft, and probably even not the beginning of day 3. It needs to be in the middle of day 3. And then if certain parameters are met, I would consider it. Hey man, good stuff. We could do this all day, and we've gone a little bit longer than I wanted to go today, but we got so many people eating this stuff up. Love doing this with you, man. And hopefully maybe next week we'll do it again before the draft, kind of like maybe a final kickoff. Maybe next week what we can do is we can look at least the picks when we're taping it and make picks, and not doing a whole mock, but just going, who you would like to see at each pick for next week's edition of this. But great stuff, man. Always fun to talk with you, and have a good week. Go Niners, and we'll talk next week.
Appreciate it, man. Take care.
All right.
Yeah, never met a man I've been scared of.